Imagine being so devoted to your word that you willingly walk back into the hands of your enemies, knowing it means certain death. Not just death, but a death so gruesome that even hardened soldiers trembled at the memory. This is the story of Marcus Atilius Regulus, a Roman general whose courage was legendary and whose end was something out of a nightmare. His enemies didn't just want to kill him, they wanted to break him, piece by piece, in front of the world. What happened next became one of the most infamous tales of cruelty in all of ancient history. Before his name became synonymous with suffering, Marcus Atilius Regulus was one of Rome's brightest stars. Born into a respected family, he rose quickly through the ranks of the Roman army, known for his discipline, his bravery, and his unwavering sense of duty. By the mid-3rd century BC, Rome was locked in a brutal struggle against Carthage for control of the Mediterranean. Regulus was chosen as consul, a position of immense power, and given command of Rome's forces. Confident and ambitious, he carried the war directly to Carthage's doorstep. In 256 BC, he led a massive invasion fleet across the sea, determined to strike at the very heart of Rome's greatest enemy. At first, everything seemed to go his way. Regulus and his legions swept across North Africa, winning battle after battle. Roman soldiers marched deeper into Carthaginian territory, and soon the city of Carthage itself loomed on the horizon. For a brief moment, it looked as if victory was already in Rome's grasp. Regulus offered the Carthaginians peace, but his terms were so harsh, so humiliating that they stunned his enemies. He demanded their unconditional surrender, stripping Carthage of its pride as well as its power. To the Romans it felt like triumph. To the Carthaginians it was an insult that would never be forgiven, and that arrogance would soon lead Fars, Regulus, to disaster. But Carthage wasn't finished. Humiliated by Regulus's demands, they turned to an unlikely saviour, a Spartan mercenary named Xanthippus. Trained in the art of war from birth, Xanthippus brought with him the discipline of Greece's most feared warriors. Under his command, Carthage's battered army was transformed into a force unlike anything the Romans had faced before. In 255 BC, the two sides clashed at the Battle of Tunis. What began as another confident march for Regulus quickly spiralled into disaster. The Carthaginian war elephants thundered forward, shattering the Roman lines. Xanthippus's infantry pressed hard, and soon the battlefield was drenched in Roman blood. Regulus's proud legions, thousands of men who had followed him across the sea, were cut down where they stood. The Roman army that once seemed unstoppable was broken in a single day. Survivors fled in chaos, leaving behind a field of corpses. And at the centre of it all, Regulus himself was taken alive. The man who had dared to demand Carthage's surrender was now paraded in chains through their streets, a living trophy of their vengeance. For Rome, it was an unthinkable humiliation. For Regulus, it was only the beginning of a nightmare. For years, Regulus languished in a Carthaginian prison. To many in Rome, he was already a memory, a fallen hero mourned as dead. But in Carthage, he was still alive, held like a prized pawn in their long and bitter struggle. By 250 BC, both sides were weary from years of bloodshed. Carthage, desperate to gain the upper hand, saw an opportunity. They turned to their captive general with a proposition. He would be sent back to Rome to negotiate peace or arrange a prisoner exchange. In return, he had to swear an oath that once his mission was complete, he would return to Carthage, no matter the outcome. It was the chance of a lifetime. Regulus could see his homeland again, breathe free Roman air, and hold his family in his arms. But it came with a cruel condition. His freedom was only temporary. When Regulus walked into the Roman Senate, the city erupted with joy. The long-lost general had returned from the dead. Many expected him to beg Rome to accept Carthage's terms, to plead for mercy so that he and countless other prisoners could be spared. That's what his captors were counting on. But Regulus stunned everyone. Standing tall in front of his countrymen, he urged them to reject Carthage's offer completely. He declared that Rome must never accept such dishonourable peace, that Carthage was weakened and could not be trusted. His words were not those of a broken prisoner. They were the fiery command of a Roman consul who still believed in victory. The Senate was shocked. His family was devastated. According to ancient accounts, his wife and children clung to him, begging him not to return. He was free now, home at last. Why throw it away? But Regulus's answer was simple and merciless. He had sworn an oath, and he would keep it. Honour, to him, was worth more than life. And so, over the desperate cries of his family, Marcus Atilius Regulus boarded a ship back to Carthage, knowing full well he was sailing toward his doom. When Regulus returned to Carthage and announced Rome's refusal to make peace, the reaction was explosive. To the Carthaginians, this was not just defiance, it was humiliation. They had trusted their prisoner to act in good faith, only for him to turn their gamble into a cruel mockery. Fury swept through the city. The leaders of Carthage saw Regulus not as a man of honour, but as an enemy who had spit in their face. A simple execution, they decided, would not be enough. No, his death had to be an example, a warning to Rome, and a punishment so brutal that it would scar the memory of everyone who witnessed it. From that moment, Regulus's fate was sealed. He would not die as a soldier falls in battle. He would be broken, piece by piece, until nothing remained but suffering. And so, the preparations for his torment began. The torment of Marcus Atilius Regulus began not with blades or fire, but with something far more insidious: sleep. Locked away in a dark Carthaginian dungeon, he was denied even the smallest mercy of rest. Whenever his exhausted body tried to surrender to slumber, guards were there to jab him awake with spears or shout in his ears. Hour after hour, day after day, they forced him to remain conscious. At first he fought it with the discipline of a soldier, but as the nights dragged on, his mind began to unravel. His thoughts scattered, his body trembled, and the lines between reality and nightmare blurred. To stay alive became its own kind of torture. He was not just losing strength, he was losing himself. This was only the opening act. The Carthaginians were testing how much the proud Roman could endure before his spirit broke. But as cruel as sleep deprivation was, it was nothing compared to what came next. After days of sleepless torment, Regulus was dragged from the dungeon and shoved into the blinding North African sun. For weeks his world had been nothing but darkness and chains. Now, the sudden light stabbed into his eyes like knives. But that was only the beginning. A Carthaginian torturer stepped forward, holding a small blade. With slow, deliberate precision, he sliced away the thin folds of skin that shielded Regulus's eyes. In an instant, the Roman general was left permanently exposed, unable to ever close his eyes again. Blood trickled down his face as he realized the full horror of what had been done to him. They forced him to stand beneath the scorching sun, eyes wide open, no relief, no escape. His vision blurred as the heat seared his unprotected gaze. The dryness, the burning, the relentless glare. It was agony that no man could endure for long. Witnesses claimed that Regulus, who had once faced entire armies without fear, finally screamed. But for the Carthaginians, this was still not enough. His torment was far from over. Just when it seemed his suffering could go no further, the Carthaginians unveiled their final cruelty. Regulus was forced into a wooden cage lined with sharp iron spikes. The trap was designed with precision, too small to stand upright, too narrow to sit or lie down. No matter how he moved, the spikes tore into his flesh. Every breath, every twitch, every attempt at relief only drove the metal deeper. His body became a canvas of wounds, pressed against cold, unyielding iron with no escape. And the worst part? They left him there, not for hours, but for days. Exposed to the burning sun by day and the freezing winds by night, Regulus was trapped in a cycle of unending pain. His body weakened, his wounds festered, but the cage allowed no release. To the Carthaginians, this was justice. To the Romans who later heard the tale, it was a martyrdom. A general who had once commanded legions was now reduced to a broken figure, slowly consumed by the very cage built to destroy him. His torment became a legend, whispered for centuries as the most brutal punishment ever inflicted on a Roman. But even the spiked cage was not the end. According to some accounts, the Carthaginians saved their most terrifying punishment for last. When Regulus was too weak to even cry out, they dragged his broken body toward a massive bronze cauldron. Beneath it, flames roared to life, heating the metal until it glowed. Witnesses claimed he was lowered inside, the heat searing his skin, the air itself turning to fire in his lungs. The screams echoed through the streets of Carthage, a sound so haunting that even some of his enemies were said to have turned away. Whether this final horror was literal truth or a legend born of Rome's hatred for Carthage, one thing is certain. The image of Regulus in the boiling cauldron became a symbol of cruelty that echoed through history. It wasn't just the death of a man, it was the destruction of a symbol, a warning, and a myth that Rome would never forget. And that memory fuels a vengeance that would burn just as hot. The death of Marcus Atilius Regulus was more than just the end of a Roman general. It became a weapon in Rome's arsenal. His story, retold by senators, poets, and soldiers, painted Carthage not as a rival, but as a monster. Every detail of his torment, from the sleepless nights to the boiling cauldron, fueled Rome's hunger for vengeance. Whether all of it was fact or Roman propaganda didn't matter. What mattered was the effect. Regulus's suffering turned into legend, and legend became a rallying cry. The Romans swore that his sacrifice would not be in vain. In the years that followed, they unleashed wars with a fury that eventually brought Carthage to ashes. But beyond politics and conquest, the tale of Regulus endures because of its chilling power. It is a reminder of how far hatred can drive nations and how the line between truth and myth can blur when stories are soaked in blood. Even today, centuries later, the name Regulus echoes not as the man he was, but as a symbol of horror, vengeance, and the terrible cost of war. The story of Marcus Atilius Regulus is one of those rare moments in history where fact and legend blur so deeply that it's almost impossible to separate them. Was he really tortured in a spiked cage? Was the boiling cauldron a true horror, or a tale Rome crafted to stoke hatred? We may never know. But what we do know is this. The legacy of Regulus was powerful enough to fuel Rome's thirst for revenge, and in the end, Carthage was wiped from the map. His suffering, real or exaggerated, became a turning point in the ancient world. And maybe that's the most haunting part. It wasn't just the agony of one man that changed history, it was the story of that agony. A story retold, reshaped, and burned into memory until it became larger than life itself. So the question remains, how much of history is truth and how much is imply the stories we choose to believe.